What if discipline was never about forcing yourself to suffer? What if the reason you keep falling off isn't weakness, but the fact that your brain was never designed to obey commands? Every time you promise, "I'll be disciplined this time," you're fighting the wrong battle. Because the brain doesn't follow willpower, it follows reward. And until you understand that, discipline will always feel like resistance instead of momentum. Most people believe discipline is a personality trait, something you're either born with or you're not. That belief is why so many smart, capable people stay stuck. They try harder, they download apps, they make rules they can't keep. And when they fail, they assume something is wrong with them. But nothing is wrong with you. You've just been trying to win a psychological game using rules that don't match how the brain actually works. Your brain isn't lazy, it's efficient. It chases pleasure, avoids pain, and automates whatever feels safe and familiar. That's why scrolling feels effortless. That's why junk habits stick. And that's why discipline collapses the moment motivation fades. In this video, you're not going to be told to push harder. You're going to learn how to re-engineer discipline so your brain starts craving consistency instead of resisting it. Not through hype, not through punishment, but through systems that turn effort into identity. If you've ever felt like your potential is being blocked by your own patterns, this is where that changes. Let's begin. Reward the rep, rewired for internal warfare. Most people believe discipline fails because they are weak. That belief is convenient. It lets the ego stay intact. But the truth is more uncomfortable. Your brain is not designed to obey commands. It is designed to repeat what feels rewarding and avoid what feels empty or punishing. Every time you've tried to be disciplined through force alone, you were declaring war on your own nervous system. And you lost, not because you lacked character, but because you fought biology with ideology. Your brain doesn't care about your future self. It cares about what happens immediately after an action. That's why scrolling is addictive. That's why junk food wins late at night. That's why discipline collapses when motivation fades. Not because discipline is painful, but because it is emotionally unrewarded. Most people do the work and then feel nothing. No signal, no confirmation, no internal yes. So the brain concludes, this costs energy and gives nothing back. Avoid. Here's the shift. You stop asking your brain to tolerate discipline. You train it to associate discipline with identity-confirming reward. Not indulgence, not escape, recognition. Every rep becomes a message. This is who I am. When you finish a difficult task and immediately anchor it to something small but deliberate, a phrase, a posture, a breath, a quiet acknowledgement, you are teaching your nervous system that effort equals value, not someday, now. This is how identity is installed. You don't wait until the habit works to feel good. You feel good because you showed up. That distinction matters, because over time, the brain stops asking, do I feel like doing this? It starts asking, why wouldn't I? The rep becomes familiar. The resistance weakens. The identity stabilizes. You are no longer forcing discipline. You are reinforcing it. Shrink the start, disarming the inner saboteur. Resistance is not a wall, it's an alarm. And the alarm goes off before the task begins. Your mind doesn't fear effort. It fears uncertainty. It fears loss of control. It fears exposure. That's why starting feels heavier than continuing. The brain looks at the whole task, imagines failure, judgment, exhaustion, and slams the brakes. Most people interpret this as laziness. It's not. It's threat detection. So instead of arguing with the alarm, you lower the threat level. You shrink the entry point until the nervous system stays calm. 2 minutes, 1 sentence, 1 rep, 1 step. Not because the work is small, but because the permission to begin is. This is psychological judo. Once motion starts, the brain switches modes, from anticipation to adaptation, from fear to execution. And here's the key most people miss. Starting small is not lowering standards. It is protecting consistency. You are not training output. You are training reliability. Every easy start is a vote for trust between you and yourself, and trust compounds. Soon the mind stops resisting beginnings, because beginnings no longer feel dangerous. You don't need motivation. You need safe entry. And when starting becomes easy, discipline becomes inevitable. Bundle it with pleasure, hijacking the reward system. Your brain already works against you, or rather, it works exactly as designed. It chases pleasure. It avoids pain. It automates what feels safe and familiar. So when discipline is framed as deprivation, suffering, or self-punishment, the nervous system fights back. Not consciously, reflexively. That's why just push through eventually collapses. Instead of fighting this wiring, you recruit it. You attach controlled pleasure to controlled effort, not as a bribe, but as a signal. When the brain learns, effort leads to something pleasant, it stops resisting and starts anticipating. This is not weakness, this is intelligence. You are aligning your system instead of bullying it, and something unexpected happens over time. At first, the pleasure pulls you into the work. Later, the work itself becomes the reward. Because mastery feels good, momentum feels good, integrity feels good. But you don't get there by pretending discipline should hurt. You get there by training association. The old narrative says discipline must be miserable. The Stoic truth is colder. What matters is not how it feels, but whether it repeats. And repetition follows reward. Rig the room, remove the battle entirely. Most people try to win discipline inside their head. That's the slowest way. Your environment is already shaping your behavior. You're just not doing it deliberately. Every object, notification, tab, and layout is a vote for a certain version of you. If distraction is easier than focus, distraction wins. Not because you chose it, but because friction decided for you. The disciplined person does not fight temptation endlessly. They design it out. They add friction to what weakens them. They remove friction from what strengthens them. This isn't willpower, it's architecture. When the room supports the behavior, the mind relaxes. And when the mind relaxes, consistency emerges. This is how discipline becomes calm instead of violent. You stop negotiating with yourself every hour. You stop draining energy on restraint. The space does the work. And slowly, quietly, your identity stabilizes. Not because you forced it, but because everything around you stopped pulling you backward. If-then cues, discipline that survives bad days. Most discipline doesn't fail because you didn't know what to do. It fails because you didn't know what to do when things went wrong. You had a plan for a good day. You had nothing for a bad one. That's the gap that destroys consistency. When stress hits, when fatigue shows up, when boredom creeps in, when emotion spikes. In those moments, the rational mind goes offline. And when that happens, Your habits default to whatever feels familiar, fast, and relieving. This is where most people lose control, not because they lack desire, but because they hesitate. Hesitation opens the door to negotiation. Negotiation opens the door to excuses, and excuses quietly return you to the old self. If then cues close that door, they remove choice before emotion enters the room. Instead of asking, "What should I do right now?" the decision has already been made. If this happens, then I do this. No debate, no mood check, no second guessing. This is not motivation, this is automation. Think about how quickly your hand reaches for your phone when you feel discomfort. That's not weakness, that's conditioning. If discomfort, then scroll. Your brain learned that pattern through repetition. Now you're going to overwrite it. If anxiety rises, then I slow my breathing. If I feel resistance, then I open the document. If I want to quit, then I do one more minute. If I feel the urge to escape, then I stand up and move. These responses don't need to be heroic. They need to be predictable. The brain calms down when it knows what comes next. Uncertainty creates panic. Structure creates stability. This is why discipline collapses under stress for most people. They rely on willpower in moments where the nervous system is flooded. Willpower disappears under pressure. Rules don't. Behavioral science calls this implementation intention. Stoic philosophy calls it preparation. You don't wait to decide when the storm arrives. You decide in advance. Marcus Aurelius wrote about rehearsing adversity, not because he was pessimistic, but because he refused to be surprised by himself. If you know your weak moments, you can design your strength around them. You already know your traps: late night, low energy, emotional discomfort, overthinking, boredom disguised as exhaustion. Those moments are not flaws, they're cues, and every cue can be rewired. The goal is not to eliminate temptation. The goal is to respond automatically. Over time, something shifts. The moment that used to derail you becomes the moment that grounds you. Stress no longer means collapse. Fatigue no longer means quitting. Discomfort no longer means escape. It means execution. Not because you're forcing yourself, but because the decision was already made by a calmer, stronger version of you. That's real discipline. Not intensity, not motivation, not mood, preparedness. And once your brain learns that discomfort always leads to a controlled response, fear loses leverage. You stop reacting. You start responding. This is how you become reliable, even when everything inside you wants relief. Not by fighting emotion, but by out-designing it. Track tiny wins. How identity locks in. Your brain doesn't change because you intend to be different. It changes because it sees proof. Every time you say, "I'll be disciplined this time," your brain doesn't respond to the promise. It responds to history. And if history says you start strong and disappear, that's the identity your nervous system protects. This is why tracking matters. Not for productivity, not for perfection, but for belief. The brain needs evidence. When effort disappears into nothing, the brain assumes it didn't matter. No feedback means no reinforcement. No reinforcement means no repetition. That's why most people quit silently. They're working, but the work leaves no trace. Tracking creates a visible signal. I showed up. I followed through. This is real. And the win must be small. Big goals overwhelm the system. Small wins calm it. A single checkbox, a mark on a calendar, one sentence written, 2 minutes completed. The scale doesn't matter. Consistency does. Every recorded action becomes a data point your identity absorbs. I don't quit. I return. I do what I say. That's how discipline becomes self-image. This isn't about streak obsession. It's about continuity. Miss a day. You don't erase the page. You don't spiral. You mark the next win. Because the real habit isn't perfection. It's returning without drama. Over time, something powerful happens. The brain starts protecting the streak. Not because of pressure, but because breaking it feels like breaking identity. You're no longer chasing motivation, you're maintaining alignment. That's the shift. And when you track tiny wins, you change the inner dialogue. You stop saying, I'm trying. You start saying, this is who I am. Discipline becomes quiet pride, not loud confidence, not external validation, just the calm knowing that you showed up again. This is how people stop restarting their lives every Monday. They don't wait to feel inspired. They look at the evidence and continue. Track the smallest unit that proves movement. Make it visible. Make it repeatable. Because what you track, you reinforce. And what you reinforce, you become. Pre-commit. Remove the option to fail. Most people don't fail because they make bad decisions. They fail because they leave decisions open. They rely on the future version of themselves to do the right thing, without realizing that the future version of themselves will be tired, distracted, emotional, and seeking relief. That's not a character flaw. That's how the brain works. In the moment of temptation, your brain does not care about your long-term goals. It cares about immediate comfort. That's why promises made in clarity are broken in chaos. Pre-commitment solves this by doing one critical thing. It removes choice before emotion arrives. Instead of asking, what do I feel like doing right now? The answer has already been decided. You lock the door while you're calm, so you don't have to fight yourself later. This is not discipline through force. It's discipline through architecture. Think about your most consistent behaviors. You don't debate them. You don't negotiate. You just do them. Why? Because the decision was already made. Pre-commitment creates that same inevitability for habits you struggle with. You already know where you fail. Late at night, when no one is watching, when stress spikes, when boredom creeps in, when motivation disappears. That's where systems matter most. You can block apps during focus hours, schedule work like a meeting you don't cancel, set alarms that signal action instead of intention. Tell someone your deadline before you're ready. Attach a small consequence to inaction. Not punishment, stakes. Stakes wake the nervous system up. They make the future real. Behavioral science calls this fighting present bias, the brain's tendency to sacrifice long-term benefit for short-term relief. Stoic philosophy calls it foresight. You don't wait for the urge to pass. You design your life so the urge has nowhere to go. This is why willpower is overrated. Willpower asks you to fight the same battle every day. Pre-commitment ends the war before it starts. Once your environment, schedule, and rules are locked in, discipline becomes the default. You stop asking, should I? You move straight to, it's time. And something deeper happens. Your identity starts trusting itself. You become someone who follows through not because you feel strong, but because you've removed the exits. That trust compounds. You stop fearing your weak moments because you've already accounted for them. That's real self-control. Not white-knuckling temptation, but calmly designing a life where discipline wins by default. Protect your energy. Discipline starts in the body. Most people try to fix discipline at the level of mindset. That's too late. By the time discipline fails, the body has already lost the battle. When energy drops, standards drop. When the nervous system is overloaded, the brain seeks relief, not progress, not growth, relief. That's why discipline collapses on bad days. Not because you stopped caring, but because your system is depleted. Sleep deprivation weakens impulse control. Poor nutrition destabilizes focus. Chronic stress shortens your time horizon. This isn't psychology, it's physiology. On days you're rested and regulated, discipline feels natural. On days you're exhausted, even simple tasks feel hostile. That contrast is the clue. So stop asking, how do I push harder? Ask, what is draining me? Energy leaks hide in plain sight. Late nights disguised as relaxation. Constant stimulation that never lets your nervous system settle. Blood sugar spikes that turn clarity into fog. Emotional labor that leaves nothing for yourself. You cannot build discipline on an empty system. The most consistent people don't rely on willpower. They protect their baseline. They guard sleep like armor. They fuel before they're depleted. They move to regulate stress, not to punish themselves. They schedule recovery before collapse forces it. This isn't softness, it's strategy. Discipline built on exhaustion is brittle. Discipline built on energy is durable. Your body is not an obstacle to discipline. It's the engine. Ignore it, and no system will hold. Support it, and discipline becomes almost automatic. If you keep falling off habits, don't shame yourself. Audit your energy. What are you tolerating that's quietly draining you? Fix that first. Because discipline doesn't start with pressure, it starts with capacity. One thing at a time, focus is the multiplier. Most people think they lack discipline. What they actually lack is focus. And focus doesn't disappear because you're incapable. It disappears because your attention is fractured. Multitasking feels productive, but it's not. It's cognitive debt. Every time you switch tasks, your brain pays a cost. Attention fragments, momentum resets, mental fatigue compounds. That's why you can work all day and still feel empty. Busy, but unfinished. Active, but unfulfilled. Discipline cannot survive in fragmentation. The disciplined mind does one thing at a time, fully. Not because it's slow, but because depth creates efficiency. When your brain knows exactly what matters right now, it relaxes. Clarity reduces resistance. This is why focus feels uncomfortable at first. You're not bored. You're detoxing from stimulation. Your nervous system is used to constant novelty, notifications, tabs, messages, micro rewards. When you remove that noise, the brain panics briefly. It searches for escape. Stay with it. That restlessness is not a signal to stop. It's a signal that dependency is breaking. Once the system adapts, something shifts. Focus becomes calming. Depth becomes satisfying. Completion becomes addictive. You stop craving novelty and start craving finish lines. This is how discipline stabilizes. Not through intensity, through presence. One task, one target, one direction. Before you begin any work, ask a single question. What is the one action that moves this forward? Not 10 actions, not a list. One. Name it. Commit to it. Stay until it's touched, advanced, or finished. This trains trust. Your brain relearns. When we start, we stay. When we choose, we complete. That trust is everything, because a mind that trusts itself stops procrastinating. Single focus is not limitation, it's leverage. And once you master it, discipline no longer feels like effort. It feels like alignment. Progressive overload, how discipline actually grows. Discipline does not grow through intensity. It grows through measured pressure. Most people fail because they confuse effort with effectiveness. They try to change everything at once. Wake up earlier, work harder, train longer, be stricter, and for a few days, maybe even a week, they feel powerful. Then the system crashes, not because they were weak, but because they overloaded themselves without adaptation. The nervous system doesn't respond to heroics. It responds to progressive strain. This principle comes from physical training, but it governs the mind just as strongly. If you lift the same weight forever, nothing changes. If you add too much weight too fast, you get injured. But if you increase the load slightly, then recover, the body adapts. Discipline works the same way. You don't double your workload, you increase it by 5%. 5 more minutes of focus, 1 extra rep of restraint, a slightly harder boundary, a slightly longer period of discomfort, small enough to be tolerable, large enough to create growth. This is how discipline becomes durable instead of dramatic. Most people burn out because they try to become someone else overnight. They demand a new identity without earning it. But identity is built through accumulation, not declaration. Each small increase becomes proof. Each proof becomes confidence. Each confidence makes the next increase easier. That's compounding. And just as important as pushing is knowing when to pull back. Progressive overload includes deloading, strategic rest, intentional recovery, moments where pressure is reduced so the system can integrate the work. Without this rhythm, discipline becomes brittle. The strongest people aren't always pushing forward. They are always returning smarter. They don't panic when they feel tired. They don't quit when momentum slows. They adjust. They ask, am I adapting? Am I growing slightly stronger than last week? Am I sustaining this without self-destruction? If the answer is yes, they continue. If the answer is no, they refine, not abandon. This is how discipline survives years, not months. Not through aggression, through precision. You don't need to become extreme. You need to become consistent under increasing demand. That is how strength is forged quietly, not by doing everything, but by doing a little more, again and again, until the old limits no longer exist. Miss fast, reset faster. The real definition of discipline. You are going to fail. You will miss a workout. You will break a streak. You will fall back into an old pattern. That is not the problem. The problem is what happens next. Most people don't fail their habits. They fail their recovery. One slip turns into a story. I messed up. I always do this. What's the point now? And that story quietly dismantles everything. Shame floods the system. Motivation collapses. Days turn into weeks. Not because the habit was hard, but because the identity took a hit. High-disciplined people do something radically different. They do not attach emotion to the miss. They do not argue with it. They do not spiral. They treat it as data, nothing more. What happened? Where was the friction? What broke in the system? Then they fix the system, not punish themselves. This is the rule that separates people who change from people who keep restarting their lives. Never miss twice. 1 miss is noise, 2 creates a trend, 3 becomes a pattern. So speed matters. Not speed of success, speed of return. The faster you reset, the weaker the setback becomes. That reset must be small, not heroic, not dramatic. One sentence, 1 minute, one rep, one focused breath, something that proves, I'm back. That tiny action breaks the collapse loop. It interrupts the narrative. It restores agency. It reminds the nervous system that alignment is still available. This is why perfection is poison. Perfection demands an all-or-nothing identity, and all-or-nothing always ends in nothing. Discipline is not about never falling. It's about how fast you stand up. The moment you learn to reset without self-attack, consistency becomes possible long-term. You stop fearing mistakes. You stop overprotecting streaks. You stop hesitating to start because failure no longer feels catastrophic. You trust yourself. And trust is the foundation of discipline. Not control, not pressure. Trust. I know I'll return. I know I won't disappear. I know I can recover. That confidence is unshakable. This is where most systems fail. They don't teach recovery. But this system does. Miss, reset, continue. No drama, no guilt, no delay. That's how discipline becomes your nature. Not because you're perfect, but because you're resilient. And resilience always outlasts intensity. By now, you should see it clearly. Discipline was never about force. It was never about motivation. And it was never about becoming someone you're not. It was about design. You learned that the brain doesn't follow commands. It follows rewards. That resistance fades when the start is small. That pleasure, when aligned, becomes fuel instead of distraction. That environments shape behavior long before willpower ever gets a vote. That identity is built through evidence, not intention. That rules outperform moods. That progress grows through patience, not pressure. That energy is the foundation discipline stands on. That focus multiplies effort. That growth comes from intelligent strain, not burnout. And that the strongest people aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who return fast and clean. This is what self-mastery actually looks like. Quiet, structured, relentless in its calm. No dramatic transformations. No waiting for the perfect moment. Just systems that carry you forward even when motivation disappears. You don't need to announce this shift. You don't need permission. You don't need approval. Let the results speak. Let consistency replace intensity. Let discipline become something your mind expects, not resists. This is NexusMind, where clarity becomes control, where discipline becomes identity, and where the work continues, quietly, steadily, and on your terms. If this path resonates, stay. We build here.